Hello, everyone. This is another episode of Factory Talk in partnership with Industry Week. I'm Jamie Flinchbaugh, your host. Today we have Shannon Lindsey with us.
Factory Talk Secrets of Effective Plant Leaders. Produced by
So, Shannon, welcome to the show. Why don't you tell me a bit about your company, your role, what you do at your site?
First of all, Jamie, thank you so much for having me. It's truly an honor and a privilege to talk to you. Yeah, I work in Westminster, South Carolina, for Sandvik Coromant at our Westminster production unit. Here we produce solid carbide cutting tools. We also manufacture press tools that we use in the operation of manufacturing inserts. And we also make powder here that is also used in the manufacturing of inserts. And within the last 3 or 4 years, we added another division where we are providing a reconditioning process for round tools, which you may call drill bits, we call round tools. And recently we added new production of solid carbide round tools. So I am working on my 30th year here. Been quite the journey. I started on the shop floor, running a machine, actually programming and setting up CNC grinders. I decided that I wanted something more. So I approached my leader way back when and said, almost 28 years ago, and said, "Hey, I kind of think I'd like to go to school." And he said, "That's a great idea." So I started on an education journey and went through school, worked full time, went through full-time college, graduated, and began a leadership journey with the company about 25 years ago. First as a supervisor in our shipping area. I left that and went into production management, managing the grinding area. Then I took about a 4-year stint as our quality manager, which is probably still one of my most favorite roles. I really enjoyed being a quality manager. Got to travel the world and teach and interact with customers. That was a fantastic season of my career. Went back into production, and yeah, I've been pretty well privileged to at one point run any operation we have. Recently, I've left the production management role and moved into a project coordinator role. And primarily, I'm focused on now being our Power BI architect. So I handle a lot with digital activities and then provide some consulting to our managers that are just starting out. So it's been a great, wonderful journey.
Well, that's a really cool journey. And I know we'll come back to the Power BI stuff later on, but I love the tenure, the longevity you've had with the organization, and the diversity of different roles. That's a great story, and even the support as you go through the educational journey early on. So fun. You probably be the site's historian as as well. So as you talk about that, what the site produces. Obviously, lots of complexity, lots of SKU variation. I'd imagine. I'm sure in the past, back when I used to play with machine tools more hands-on, I've probably used products coming out of the site. But that's been a long time. So as you think about your site and the day-to-day operations, what's the most important thing for really starting your day that really sets you on the right path?
Yeah, for me, I think once you're ever in production management, I don't know if you ever truly leave production management. So for me, I still have to, even though now I'm not technically responsible, I still have to see, okay, how are we doing? How's the site doing? Did we ship enough yesterday? How much do we need to ship today? I can't walk away from that. So it's too much of an ingrained habit at this point. So I tend to look at those things first thing in the morning. Pardon me for bringing it back up again, but Power BI is a big part of what I do today. So there's a few reports that I want to check the health and status on because I know that those are critical for agile decision making later in the day. So I make sure that those are healthy and they have refreshed overnight or they are on pace to refresh. So for me, it's really about thinking about how my customers, which are the leadership of the building, how are they going to be looking at the information, and is that information available? Is it healthy? Is it accurate? And I'd say that's the most normal way for me to start my day.
Well, that's good, and I love just the focus on the healthiness of the organization, right, of the operation, knowing how things are working. Um, it doesn't take a whole lot to send things off kilter, and so knowing that health, making better decisions, all becomes pretty important. I'd have to say that there's even been times when I've left an operation and still wanted the daily report.
Yeah.
um, just out of a combination of habit and interest in how things are going. So you kind of hinted at this, but you talked about your customers and obviously your past roles. You've had a lot of different relationships in the organization. So what are the high leverage? So you talked about the purpose, right? The decision making and the health of the operation. But what are your most important touch points to really get a sense of how things are going? What really informs you?
Yeah, for me, it's looking at some very I'd say the most important key metrics. Again, it's delivery. Did we deliver enough? Do we have enough to deliver today? Do we have enough to deliver in the coming days? What's the rejection level look like? That really kind of gives me a real sense of do we have some hot spots or some issues? Then I like to look at a report that we have that focuses only on WIP, work in progress. And so can I identify some bottlenecks? And most importantly, will my customers, those production leaders, will they identify those bottlenecks? And I may even send out a few messages, hey, just take a look at this one. It could be an issue. So for me, I'd say it's those big three: the deliveries, the rejections, and then really what's the health or the status of the WIP in the building.
Yeah, I like that sequence because it kind of starts from output or lagging results and kind of moves more towards leading indicators.
Yeah.
So if the lagging is already a problem,
Right.
then let's react to that. But if that's healthy, then let's start moving into some leading indicators and start reacting to that. So
Correct.
Fantastic. So you talked about obviously the support for your customers and the management of the site, and so this gets us into not just how we use information, but how we create stable organizations. What do you see as some of the most important behaviors that enables day-to-day success at your site?
I think for me, it's always started with some sort of sense of urgency. As a leader, I think you need that. Without portraying being frantic or nervous, still something I have to get this done, and I'll overcome any obstacle to do it. That sense of urgency for me is critical. I think it's also about team spirit, because you can have a sense of urgency and crush a team member along the way, and have you really accomplished the goal? No, I don't think so. So those have to for me, have to run parallel. The sense of urgency and team spirit. We like to pride ourselves in really following a good code of ethics too. So I think if those two things are at the forefront, and then just knowing I'm going to treat my coworkers better than they've ever considered treating me, if everyone focused on that, it becomes a really great place to work. We're a relatively small facility as compared to some even Sandvik Coromant production units. We're not the smallest, but we're certainly not the largest. So we have the luxury and privilege of really having almost a family feel. We're about 300 people here. But people that's been around a long time like me, I know most everyone, and most everyone knows me. And so that sense of community, family, yeah, of course, families don't always get along, right? I mean, we have our differences, but there's some level, I'll use a tough word here, of love that keeps us together. It keeps us kind of unified. So I like to think that that really helps us. We really don't have an issue with things like turnover. We find adoption of change quite simple in some cases. Now, of course, not everyone likes change, but for the most part, our level of employee engagement is high enough that they'll listen and they'll work with us because, again, we have that sense of family. So for me, I would say it summarizes down to sense of urgency, team spirit, good work ethic, and then understand that you're working with your family and treat them that way.
I love that. Those are all observable, which is always one of my guiding practices for behaviors, is make sure that they can be role modeled and observed. And I really liked how you connected urgency and team spirit, right? They're not just two good things independently, which they are, but they have to play together. It is hard to convey that sort of sense of urgency that good operations folks carry around with them, and sometimes bring to bear outside of the factory as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
But that is as pretty important. And even as you talk about the great place to work, we're recording this in November 2022. There's a lot of talk this year about sort of the battle for talent and how hard it is to get. And at this point, people are saying, well, the labor market's improving, which it is. But I would argue that the war for talent is just beginning. Getting the right 300 people in the organization and hanging on to them is still going to be super important, even as perhaps the labor market starts to improve, and that retention is going to be really key.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. I just launched a new project actually this week, and its focus is completely on how do we onboard employees. I mean, we have a process today. It's an okay process, but we know that process needs to evolve. It needs to evolve because the talent that we're trying to attract and hopefully get, the studies show that if we do a better job with onboarding, then probably 50 or 60% of those will have a better chance of being successful. And that success would mean they stay with us. Talent is hard to find. I love that you use the phrase war for talent, because that's exactly what it comes down to. We're fighting. And so when that new person agrees to come join our family, we want them to immediately say, wow, that was a great decision that I took. And I don't know that our onboarding process today really leverages that well enough. So that's the new project. I'm excited about that project. It lets me pull in some experience from the past, and also try to use some new digital tools to even automate that. I think that's the other key, is that I've been around a long time. What attracted me to this company doesn't attract people today. They're looking at things like digital. They're looking at sustainability. Is this a good company to work with within the community?
Mm-hmm.
And so that we need to shape that into our onboarding process, and we also need to shape that into our recruiting techniques. It's a different kind of workforce. I get a little bit annoyed when people complain about the young people entering the workforce, that they have different sort of maybe work ethic than we did when we were younger. I just don't believe that. I think they have a different need and different sort of expectations than we have. And it's our responsibility as leaders, I think, to match that, to find what is that expectation, completely define what ours are as an organization, but also to understand what theirs are, and try to find a way to meet. So for me, it's a completely different world for recruiting.
Yeah, I use the same word, expectation, right? They have different expectations, and that's their right. They're human beings that can set their own rules, and we can complain about it or meet them. And so I love the way you articulated that. And I love, this is sort of the onboarding process. It's kind of something that's easy to just hand over to HR and say, make sure people know what to do. Just the fact that you've selected it and that you're running it is sort of a strategic investment,
That's
and
exactly
says a lot about how important it is to the site. So I love hearing that. So let's go back to metrics a bit. A core part of what you work on.
right.
Um, how do what's your process for, I'll say, the selection of what to measure, and then how you design and use metrics? So how do you think about it? How do you test it? How do you go through the process of metric development and deployment?
That's a great question. I mean, and one that we probably don't put quite a lot of thought into anymore, because we've been around, we've been established for a long time. So in a lot of cases, we're going to measure the same things that any manufacturing facility is going to measure. We're going to measure output. We're going to, we're going to measure volume. We're going to measure all of the key finance indicators that you might imagine that we would. We'll look at overtime percentage, for example. But also too, as the strategy changes, we do have to occasionally talk about or discuss a different metric. One that we're discussing now, as an example, would be retention. Retention is really not something that we have measured per se. I mean, we have a good feeling over it. You kind of understand, all right, well, there's people coming and going. But to be honest with you, we've had the luxury of not really having turnover. Of course, the pandemic changed a lot of that, and as it did for everyone. So for us, we said, okay, maybe we should start measuring that. I'm a firm believer, if you want to change something, you have to measure it. And thankfully, I'm in a management team that agrees with that. So for us, we occasionally, depending on strategy, we will really brainstorm, what do we want what's success look like? And for us, if we're going to try to find out what success looks like, we're going to need to measure that. And like with onboarding, one of the metrics that we'll select will be retention. Now, how do we come to that? Usually it's through a fair amount of discussion, or it's handed to us, right? From a top down perspective. Our president or vice president of operations will say, hey, this is the new key metric for the year. Maybe it's something like delivery percentage, or delivery precision, something of that nature. So it can be a top down process as well. Also, employee engagement is very critical for us. So we also think about what metrics, at a shop floor level, really lets the people on the machines think, am I winning or losing today? So we try to pick 2 or 3 key metrics for them as well, that they can really, through engagement, they can really get involved with and wrap their head around. Rejections is one that comes to mind there, where they're the ones taking the decisions. Is this a good product or not? So typically then they really have a big impact on that, and they can feel like they're vested in that. So that's the other approach that we would take.
I love, all very thoughtful, and that of course is good in its own right. But that last point around how the employee evaluates whether they're winning and losing. How did you have a good day or not?
Yeah.
And too often, if we don't define that for people or with them, their answer to that question is, well, I didn't get yelled at, right? So that means it was a pretty good day. But
Right.
otherwise, they don't really know how to define that, if we don't really give them the tools to do that. So I like the thoughtfulness of all of that. So you mentioned Power BI, and there's probably other tools along the way just around the digitization. You also brought up the fact that the new generation wants more digital tools, right? They're used to it, they're comfortable with it, et cetera. So tell me a bit about the digital transformation, right? Popular buzzwords today, but the digital transformation journey. How far down that journey are you? What have you learned along the way?
Yeah, how far along are you on the digital journey is a very, I will say, almost impossible question to answer,
A fair point.
uh, because you really don't know how far the journey is. So it's very relative. I may say we're a good ways down that journey, but if the journey is still another 10,000 miles and you've only went 4, then you just started. So it really it's almost situational. I think sometimes we've came a long way. If I look back to 29 years ago as compared to today, yeah, we've come a long way. If I look to where I think we need to be, we've just began. So what have we done? Well, one of the things that we really wanted to do, we really strongly believe in employee engagement. So how can we be very transparent with as much information as possible without overloading them or bombarding the shop floor with information? We spend a lot of time really thinking about what do they want to see, what do they need to see. And I remember sitting in a management meeting and somebody said, "Hey, why don't we just go ask them?" Huh. Well, that's a great idea. So that's exactly what we did. And so now we out on our shop floor, there's no more bulletin boards or postings or those things that you used to see. They're all digital. They're all rotating information. That has helped. We have a higher educated workforce than we used to have. Power BI. I spend a lot of time, getting data, visualizing data, thinking about how my customers need that data. But I spend the most amount of time teaching them how to ask questions. What do you want? What are you looking for? What questions do you have? What do you think you know, and what do you not know? And really then trying to craft a Power BI report that they can use not only for themselves, but also within maybe something like a pulse meeting with their employees, that lets them really take a quick, good decision that has an impact on a key indicator or more than one key indicator, preferably. So I think that's from a digital perspective for us, it has really been about how do we empower people to take better and quicker decisions, and then maybe not take that decision again, right? I mean, ultimately, you don't want to be the firefighter in production. You are. I mean, you're going to be. I mean, that's just kind of inevitable. But we shop guys have always dreamed of a day when I solve a problem and I don't have that problem again. I think digital helps us with that. It also helps broaden our perspective a little bit. We get a little bit closed or narrow-minded. It's about hitting the target, right? We need lowest cost, best rejections, delivery all the time. So we get a little bit narrow in our view. And we can also forget about how far we've went, how far we've come. But visualizing this data and now having access to all of the data really lets us look back at the trends and analyze, okay, wait a minute, that happened in 2009 and I remember this is what we did. It'll probably work again. Those things in the past, that would have been a really hard analysis. Today, it's seconds to be able to drill down the information and really get to that question and ultimately that answer. I think that's the biggest change that I see, and I think it's the biggest indicator of how far we've come in our journey, is that the people, my customers, are typically now asking better questions, more educated questions than they ever have. And that if we can teach each other the same language, it makes it really easy to communicate and we can get things done very quick.
That makes a ton of sense. And I really like, you see a lot of digital transformation documentation and proposals and reports and strategies, and they all kind of outline here's the roadmap. But you kind of said, well, what's our culture, and should that be consistent with our culture? And I don't think a lot of people ask that question very early. They just say, what does good digital transformation look like? So I think that's a standout type of approach. And then what I think is a best practice approach is a user first approach, right? How are you going to use this and then work back? And this is why for you guys, it's not an IT initiative. It's a manufacturing initiative. It's a operations initiative to improve the performance of the team and then ultimately the factory. And so that sort of user first mindset is really really drives and shapes what you're trying to do.
If I can interrupt just a second, it maybe the reason that we did it the way we did it, or the journey went the way it's went with me, is because I probably didn't learn how to use or develop Power BI reports in a very good way. I went to YouTube just like anybody else would and started teaching myself. But for me, I went back to those days when I was a quality manager and I was creating, root cause analysis reports or something like that. It's a white sheet of paper. So that's still my approach with Power BI. When a user comes and asks me, hey, I need to visualize this data, I need a report, we always start with a whiteboard or a white sheet of paper and we create the report. And then I go back and I find a data model to support that. So it's a maybe not the right approach. But it's the approach that has worked for us, and it's probably the reason why it's maybe a culture first, and we'll support it with technology on the other side. That's been our approach.
Yeah, well, I think it's like any recipe, does it taste good at the end?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. That's
kind of the real test of whether you follow the recipe right or not. Was it right? Doesn't matter if it tastes good. So so no, I like your thought process. And just before we wrap up, you mentioned the impact on the decision making and making better decisions. Are there other areas where it's affected, all of this digital transformation has affected your performance at the factory?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we certainly, if you can take better and faster decisions, I talked earlier about a sense of urgency. Well, that's a strong lever to have a sense of urgency. If we can take better, faster decisions, then chances are we'll take quicker ones, and that'll have an impact. We see that. We certainly see it with something like rejections. When at the shop floor level, they can click on a Power BI report and really drill down to, hey, this machine or this person or this shift or this particular line item is the one that's causing us the most problems. Well, okay, that's the one I'm going to watch for. So I think having access to the data and being able to easily drill down that information has really impacted something like quality, for example, for us.
That's great. That's and that combination of better and faster, right? It's not one at the expense of the other. So that's a good way to put it. Well, this is really interesting. I love I love the work you're doing. I really love your story. I really love how you came up through the organization and where you're adding value now. It's such a I don't know if unique is the right word, but sort of a special story of a career path. And I love the passion in which you share it. So thanks for joining us on Factory Talk, and
great.
Good luck to you and the rest of the team there.
Thank you very much. It's been a real privilege and I'd say a good time talking to you. So thank you very much.
Wonderful.